to GC Live here on Gamecock Central. Kendall Smith, Jack Veltri joining you here for our regularly scheduled programming. Jack, you are back from Nashville. How was it? Do you have fun? Did you go out and party when South Carolina became bowl eligible?
Yes. Deep down. You know what I actually did after? I've never done this before, Kendall. I went to Hall's Chop House out in Nashville, which is like, whoa. Now, I didn't know.
Did you go with CJ?
I did. I convinced. Well, so I have a buddy who made the trip for work too at one of the other papers who was like, oh, let's go to Hall's Chop House. And I'm like, oh, okay. And convinced. I texted Shu. I'm like, hey, can we put it on the company card? He was like, yeah, let's do it. So he's like, even put a few beers on it if you want. You know, I was like, I don't mind if I do. Now we did the bar menu though, so it's much cheaper to do the bar menu, and it's like the total bill only came out to I think maybe like $100 for myself, CJ, and an intern. So like, not bad at all things considered. So it was a good time.
Wow. Okay, look at Shu giving you all the Hall's Chop House dinner after South Carolina became bowl eligible in Nashville. That is so nice of Shu. Thank you, Shu, on behalf of those three. And I'm looking forward to my Hall's Chop House. No, I'm kidding.
It takes guts to pull that type of move.
It does. I can't believe you asked for that.
I know. Well, I was like, we'll see. We'll see what he says, but yeah.
Okay, well, there you have it, everybody. Jack Veltri goes to Nashville, watches South Carolina beat Dowell, goes to Hall's Chop House for dinner, and just has himself a grand old time. I'm glad you had a good time, Jack. And it seems like the team had a great time as well. Something about the Music City. I actually put out a tweet about this a few days ago when South Carolina won the game. And I'm like, reminds me of a couple of years ago when South Carolina became bowl eligible in Nashville. So there we go. South Carolina officially going to a bowl game this year, and they're hoping to add on a couple more wins here at the end of the season to really boost their resume and get into the best bowl game possible. We heard from the coordinators today, Dowell, Loggains, and Clayton White, as South Carolina, they are getting ready for a big time matchup this weekend. And Jack, this is a game we have talked about for a while now, because Missouri is South Carolina's kryptonite. Missouri has been a problem for South Carolina over the last X amount of years. And this is really a game that South Carolina needs to win, I think, just so the fan base can be like, yeah, South Carolina can beat Missouri. Because Missouri has been a team, for whatever reason, doesn't matter how good South Carolina is, it just seems like Missouri always has the upper hand.
Totally. Like, I think for this season to feel like, to get everyone on board with it, essentially, of like, okay, this season's legit, you have to beat Missouri. Because, I mean, look, it's been a very long time since South Carolina's done that. 2018 was the last time. So, look, it's been a great year so far. And look, Missouri doesn't look great this season, and it looks like South Carolina can actually beat them as now, 2 touchdown favorites. But that is what a lot of people are waiting to see. Like, okay, if South Carolina goes out here and actually does their thing like they have been doing against a team that they haven't beaten forever, you get a lot of people excited and a lot more on board with what's going on this season.
Yeah, didn't Coach Drinkwitz say that Missouri's a playoff team potentially?
He was saying that after the game against Oklahoma. And mind you, in case you missed that game, I mean, look, I'm watching in Halls like on my phone, and it's like Oklahoma's ready to win this thing, and then Missouri ties the game, and then Jackson Arnold fumbles, and Missouri scores to take the lead with like a minute left. It was crazy. And then he just goes out there and says it. Then I think I heard that he doubled down and just continued to feel that way. So look, hypothetically speaking, yes, they are. They could be a playoff team with 2 losses, but I don't think it's going to happen. Not just because if they finish the season even with 2 losses, I just don't think their resume is good enough. But hey, I give him a lot of credit for having belief. That's all you can really do as a coach.
I can't have anything bad to say about him being positive and, trying to get his team to keep competing, keep fighting, obviously in hopes of that dream coming true. I don't necessarily know if it will. And if South Carolina beats Missouri this weekend, then that's not happening. No way. But hey, you got to give him credit for being positive and having that belief, as you mentioned. But like we said, talked earlier in the day, you did, to the coordinators, and we always kind of dive into it here on GC Live on Wednesdays. And thank you, everybody, always for tuning in and commenting. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we really enjoy this 45 minutes to an hour that we get to spend with you. But Jack, as you were able to hear from the coordinators earlier, like I ask you every single week, what stood out?
Yeah. Again, it's usually a lot of the same, but I feel like this week it's just the vibes are good right now. I think that's the main thing I can take away is that it's a lot more fun getting to well, I don't even know if fun's the right word, but you get a lot more out of these coordinators when the team is winning. So one main thing I did, because there's obviously a lot that stood out, but I think the main thing to me that stood out was Dowell Loggains was asked about the receivers, and I think they've only used or targeted 4 to 5 guys in each of the last 2 games. And I'll be quite blunt here. I mean, he basically just said the receivers choose the depth chart based on how they practice, which I thought was something really interesting. And he kind of used a little bit of language I'm not going to use, but you want to be a kick butt football team, you have to figure out how to not kick your own butt. So fill in the blank with what you want there. But basically, just the way the receivers practice are going to be, how they figure out who plays. And one guy in particular, he really did talk a lot about today with how impressive he's been was Nick Harbor. And Nick, I felt like had a pretty good game last week against Vanderbilt. Now, it wasn't anything like astonishing, like 100 yards, 2 touchdowns or anything, but he had 4 catches for 43 yards, led the team in receiving against Vandy, and he made some nice plays and looked like he was getting a lot more open and creating separation. So, look, Dowell's very happy with the way Nick's come along this year. He got thrown to the fire last year, and now he's starting to figure out some of the intricacies of playing receiver. And so I think there's a lot of good that came out of that. As for the defense and what Clayton White had to say, just there's always a lot that stands out with him. Trying to pinpoint something in particular. One thing I thought that was interesting today was when DQ Smith was not playing at all against Vandy, because mind you, Shane Beamer and the staff learned minutes before the game that DQ wasn't going to be able to play due to an injury. Clayton said that he pretended like he didn't know that DQ was going to be out, and he just did that in order to keep himself calm. But the thing about this defense is even when one guy goes down, others are able to step up and play really well. And that's how Peyton Williams, the backup defensive back, played in this game. And Clayton said he's always been ready when his number's called, and he was proud of the way he went out there and did his job. So, yeah, a lot to get into with what the coordinators had to say. But if I'm pinning this down on one thing apiece, those are definitely what stands out to me.
Well, I think what stands out to a lot of people, probably from what you just said, is the conversation that was had today about Nick Harbor, because so many people have wanted to see Nick get more and more involved throughout this season. And you got to see a little bit more of that last weekend against Vanderbilt. And Dowell Loggains obviously talked about it here today. You just talked about it. You're seeing steps in the right direction for him. Do you feel like last week's game plan was something that we should expect to see going forward in terms of involvement with Nick Harbor?
I think so. It makes sense because, look, we always hear that Nick's practicing really well. That's the same thing we heard today, is that Nick has been really solid in practice for this team, and he's putting it together on the field now. So, yeah, I would totally expect him to get involved. Now, getting him involved also means he has to do his own job. He has to create separation. He has to catch passes. He did a lot of that really well against Vanderbilt. There were a few times where he would run like a route and he would just get open. And even on some deep, routes downfield, he didn't get the ball thrown his way. But I mean, he was blowing past defensive backs. And part of that's also Lenore Sellers, either A, not seeing him, or B, Harbor was already too far downfield to where it would require a really far pass. So, yeah, I think we're going to see Nick be more involved in this game plan. Will he get the targets every time? I'm not sure. There was that 2-game stretch in between Alabama and to the Vanderbilt game where Nick really didn't have a ton of involvement. I think he only had 2 catches. But, again, I do expect to continue. I think you should expect to continue to see him on the field. And when his number is called, he's probably going to be able to make an impact.
All right. Well, before we continue any further, GC Live is always brought to you by our great friend, Clint Hammond. Right, Jack?
That's right. So if you are currently in the market looking for a home, or you need help with your mortgage, you need any help with your housing needs, go ahead and give Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans a call. If you don't know where to start, Clint is your guy to call. He's been in the mortgage industry for a very long time. He's a lifelong Gamecock fan. Oh, and by the way, he's also a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central and all of our Gamecock Central live programs. So what more can you ask for when looking for the right guy to go to? Clint is definitely the one to call at 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him is 71597. Or you can also go to ClintHammond.com for all your needs. So want to thank Clint for being a wonderful sponsor of GC Live. And if you're interested, all his info will be right above us here on screen.
Okay, let's keep on talking about what the coordinators had to say today. Back to Dowell Loggains. He talked about Lenoris Sellers and just talked about how proud he is of Sellers. And, he did have a lot of expectations coming into this year. That's something that Dowell Loggains mentioned today during his press conference. But he said, it was really about putting him in the game situation where he can kind of learn and grow. And it's about getting reps and not making the same mistakes twice. And I think we have seen that growth in Lenoris, especially over these last few weeks. So really good to hear that praise from Dowell Loggains, because from my perspective and what I've been seeing out of South Carolina and the way that Lenoris has improved over these last several games for South Carolina is really clear and really obvious to me, Jack. So I thought that was great that he was, getting his praise that he deserved from Dowell Loggains in front of the media.
He's looking a lot more comfortable out there. I mean, some of the plays he's made over these last few weeks have been really good. You saw him complete 70% of his passes against Vanderbilt. He had 2 touchdowns. He had that incredible 51-yard pass play where it looked like he was about to get sacked, and then he scrambles out of it, and he has the vision downfield to make a lollipop-type throw to Jared Brown for a wide-open gain. So Sellers is doing a lot of good things. Obviously, he did fumble again in the game against Vandy, but it didn't really make too much of a difference. So I think things are really rolling for him right now. You see that he's a lot more comfortable out there. And Dowell kind of touched on it. Like, obviously, a lot has been made about the way, people want him to be that guy right out of the gate. And it takes time for anyone in his position to develop. And that is the key word, develop, because, game 1 to now, you're seeing a night and day difference between the way Sellers started the season and how he's, we're kind of getting towards the home stretch here, how he's finishing the season. He's looking like a veteran out there. He's playing really well. Shane's been talking about how much more vocal Sellers has been and how he's not really afraid to say what he needs to say. And I think he has all the characteristics of a quality quarterback in the SEC. And keep in mind, this is only year 1 of him being a starter. Like, South Carolina could have him back for, another 3 years potentially? That's really an exciting prospect to think about. But again, for this being year 1 and how much progress he's made in just a few months, it's been really remarkable.
Yeah, agree 100%. And I think, we always bring it up here on this show, but I like to continue to bring it up because people forget, like, this is a freshman quarterback and this is a guy who's 19 years old, right? Like, he is 19 years old.
Crazy.
He has developed this much and grown this much up until this point in the season. And we were high on him at Gamecock Central when he was in high school, and he was really great at the high school level. And I think, I always say it, Wes Mitchell had that confidence and was like, yeah, this is going to be a really, really good player for South Carolina. But sometimes it does require a little bit of patience. And sometimes it does require having to go through some growing pains and get a few games, under your belt to be able to really, really feel confident and feel like, okay, I have a great grasp of this offense and I feel good with where I'm at. And I think we're seeing that now with Lenoris Sellers. So he's always had the ability and the talent. Now it's just, okay, he's at the point where he's feeling really comfortable with that. And that's a reminder we've said on this show all year long, Jack. I mean, this is a young guy, 19 years old, freshman, and he's, competing against quarterbacks in the SEC that are seasoned and guys that have been there for years. And we're seeing this version of Lenoris now that I am extremely impressed with.
It's crazy that he is 19. Honestly, like, you really do forget that, me and you, we're not much older than any of these guys, or in some cases, some of them are older than us. But it's just crazy to think that this is a guy that's barely an adult doing all this stuff, and he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders, the weight of an entire state really on his shoulders, and a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations. How are you going to fill in after Spencer Rattler did a lot of good things here? And he's really grown and blossomed and developed. And part of his success comes down to his ability as a dual threat quarterback. He's ran the football a lot better throughout the season. His decision-making's gotten better, and his passing's gotten better. He's thrown for nearly 250 yards in each of the last 2 games. Like, that is something to be said, because look, sometimes when you have a dual threat guy, they're usually run first, throw second, and when they're throwing, they're not throwing for a ton of yards. But in his case, it's a lot more dynamic. It's not one over the other. He's really good at both. And again, he's doing this all in his first year as a starter, 19-year-old kid. And I think, the opponents will always get tougher as the years go along and stuff. But for him, it's like he's only going to continue to grow and to develop. And like Dowell said, he doesn't make the same mistake twice. So got to be really excited about what he's been able to do.
Well, it took a little bit of time in that Vanderbilt game to kind of get the offense going and start to put some pieces together and really start to roll and obviously get the ball in the end zone. And South Carolina thankfully was able to do that. They came out on top 28-7. But I'm curious, Jack, not even just with Lenoris, but I guess with him leading that group and the offense as a whole, what was the difference? Like, what was the difference from when that game was tied 7-7 versus South Carolina being able to really kind of start to get things rolling?
Well, I think number one, it started with your defense, right? The defense did a great job of setting the tone. Like, let's say right after Lenoris fumbled in the second quarter, I think it was the second quarter. It was in the first half. Had South Carolina's defense not forced that fumble on the strip sack of Diego Pavia by Kyle Kennard, I mean, you might be down 7-0 to start the game. Keep in mind, this also all came after Alex Ferreira missed a field goal. So you could have been behind early in this game, but your defense gave you a chance and you got the ball back. You drove down the field and scored. I think the biggest difference was the fact that anytime Vanderbilt tried to or did something, South Carolina was able to respond and counteract. Normally, with how good this defense is, you would expect, like, okay, maybe the offense isn't going to be firing on all cylinders. And that was the case at times this year. But, like, ever since the Alabama game, the offense has been really playing a lot better, and you're seeing this team play much better complementary football, and that's exactly what we saw on Saturday. Anytime the defense did something good, the offense was right there to respond. And anytime Vanderbilt's offense did something, which didn't happen too often, you saw the offense go out there for South Carolina and put together nice, long, sustainable drives, and in some ways even beat Vanderbilt in their own game, especially on third downs when you went 9 of 12. That was another key part of this game where you really had success.
Well, you talk about the defense coming in and really setting the tone during that game. And, this weekend, obviously, South Carolina will rely a ton on the defense as well because they've been so good throughout this whole season. I mean, honestly, arguably the best defense in college football, one of, absolutely, and just so impressive what Clayton White and his group has been able to accomplish so far this season. And, we've talked so much about this Missouri matchup and how it's not gone in South Carolina's favor over the last few years. And it's South Carolina's kryptonite and so on and so forth. And, earlier today, Clayton White kind of talked about that, saying we don't really have the time now to keep harping on the history with Missouri over the last few years, but they're a really physical football team. And he said they play well in November. So this weekend, I'm curious, what do you think with Missouri presents the biggest challenge to South Carolina's defense?
I think in terms of what they do offensively, you got to know, like, whoever's at quarterback for them, the ball is going to their top 2 targets without question. That is Theo Weiss Jr. and Luther Burden. Like, those are names that by this point, I think if you watch Gamecock football enough and you've paid attention to how things have kind of gone down in this, I mean, you can call it a rivalry, I guess, because there's a trophy that goes along with it, surprisingly enough. But
the Battle of the Columbias.
That's right, the Mayor's Cup. But you would know that these are the 2 guys that have always been the top targets for Missouri, like without question. It's not even close. Like for reference, Theo Weiss has caught 41 passes for 552 yards and 3 touchdowns. Then Luther Burden, who is going to be a probable first-round NFL draft pick when it's all said and done, he's caught 45 passes for 505 yards and 4 touchdowns. Right after that, I mean, there's a significant drop-off in who the next top target is, and that's Mookie Cooper, who has 12 catches for 235 yards with no touchdowns. So my point is you're going to see a heavy dose of Missouri trying to beat you with their 2 stud receivers. Now, we don't know who's going to exactly be at quarterback for the Tigers. It could be Drew Pine again. It could be Brady Cook, who, if Brady starts, he's probably not 100%, and maybe that's the South Carolina's benefit. But whoever's out there at quarterback, you already know where the ball's going for sure, especially considering the fact there's no Cody Schrader in this offense anymore, the elite running back that the Tigers had last year. They're going to have to beat you with these 2 weapons they have on the outside. And for South Carolina, they know that. And Shane's made it a focal point that they need to stop those guys when they get their catches, limit their yardage. And it's the same thing for Clayton White in this defense. So one of the big battles in this game will be out there in coverage. And look, I think South Carolina matches up pretty well with these guys. I think they've done a really good job against some of the better receivers in the country this season. They have the confidence. I mean, the way Odie Fortune was talking this week just about how these receivers don't really scare them at all or anything, I think that says a lot about how this secondary has been able to play well this season.
Well, they should be confident because they have been very, very good. And we know that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way that Clayton White coaches this group. And we have to give him so much credit and a ton of praise because obviously he leads it, right? And he is the guy in charge of this defense. And, you know, he makes the decisions. And that's ultimately why South Carolina's defense has been as successful as they have. And they've been very successful as well in the second half of games. And he talked about that today as well during his press conference and talked about just the quick decisions and adjustments that they have to make. And he feels like that's why they've been successful in the second half. He said they did that a bunch against Texas A&M. I think that's huge. And I think that's really important because, you know, oftentimes you go in with the game plan, you have an idea of what you're going to do, and to be able to make those adjustments, but not just say, okay, we're going to make these adjustments, but to execute those adjustments for South Carolina to be able to do that on a consistent basis, Jack, I think just speaks to the talent level of this group, but also the talent of the coaching staff to be able to prepare them to do that so well. So it's really so many layers that goes into this defense being good. It's not just about having a good coaching staff and having a talented group of players. It's about them being able to prepare, being able to execute, being able to do that on a consistent basis. And that's why I think South Carolina absolutely has one of the best defenses in the country right now.
Definitely. It's a yin and yang sort of thing where you obviously have Clayton White, who's the head guy, the head honcho, getting this whole thing, this whole ship in order. But you also need your staff. You need your coaches. You need your players, your people that are going to go out there and help execute the game plan. Because Clayton's only one guy. There's 11 players in the field, and they are doing their job right now. They have been fantastic. And, yeah, I mean, the adjustments have been really extraordinary how quickly. Because think about it. When you let's bring up the A&M game, for instance. It's a 2020 ball game. You have about, 15 to 20 minutes, really 10 minutes, to be honest, to get into the locker room, sit down, go over things. That's a quick amount of time that's going to fly by to make adjustments. And he was talking about how they made 5-6 different adjustments at halftime. Granted, small adjustments, but adjustments nonetheless, obviously, since they pitched a shutout in the second half. So to be able to do that in such an efficient amount of time is one thing, and tell the players that, hey, we need to do this, we need to do that. But the players going out there and doing it in such a good manner and being efficient and shutting down that offense is really impressive. And I think that's why Clayton's going to get a head coaching job at the end of the year. Whenever his time at South Carolina whenever the season comes to an end this year, I think he's going to be one of those hot commodities that coaches or teams are going to be going after. And I can see exactly why. This is a guy that is a true leader, and he has done a fantastic job with this defense throughout his time at South Carolina, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think being able to do that in the second half as well is so huge, because I remember last season, like that was a big issue, was that South Carolina would come out of the half and you're like, what did you talk about? Like, what happened? Because it just felt like in certain games, like the wheel started to kind of come off of the bus a little bit in the second half. But for South Carolina to actually come out with those adjustments, execute them, do it well, and still really be in these games in the second half or pull away in the second half, like that is the difference between a decent team or a good team and a great team. And I feel like we're really starting to see the South Carolina program, this team, turn into a great team this season. This cracks me up. I agree.
It does.
It does. I feel like, and also I feel like the team is like totally different. I mean, obviously it's the first game of the season, right? So after the Old Dominion game, everyone was hitting the panic button. Everyone was like, oh my goodness, like this is not good. South Carolina is going to win like 3 or 4 games this season. Like we are in big trouble. But we see that South Carolina will be going to a bowl game. Things have since improved. But yeah, it does feel like a long time ago. And Jack, I feel like you would better understand this, obviously, as the person who has been at every single game.
Yeah, no, here's the interesting thing is that it's a great point. The season does fly by, but at the same time, like it feels like yesterday since it was September and August and all that. But at the same time, it also has that feeling of like, man, that game was so long ago. Like, look how far this team has come. I think the feeling would be different if South Carolina just wasn't good at all this season. It was just loss after loss after loss, like many people were expecting after that close game. But it really is like a night and day difference. The way this team plays now, blowing teams out, they're playing like a championship level football team. And it stinks that they've lost 3 games, because we'd be having the conversation of this team's for sure going to the playoffs, right? As long as they don't lose another game, they're going to the playoff with 2 losses or even 1 loss. But we're talking about 3 losses and probably on the outside looking in. But you know what? This team, give them a lot of credit. That Old Dominion game could have defined their season. It could have been how the whole year has gone, but it hasn't. Like anytime they've gone through some sort of adversity, they've responded. Anytime the fan base has hit the panic button, anytime there's been doubters out there, anytime things in games haven't gone their way, refs, bad calls, other teams making big plays, they've always punched back. And that is something you really have to admire about this team. If there's one thing that's going to define the 2024 South Carolina Gamecocks, it is going to be the fact that they were always able to respond to adversity and come out big.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You know, it is unfortunate, and we obviously cannot continue to harp on the past because it's done, it's over. But, you know, you hear it all the time, and like now South Carolina is starting to get a lot of national media attention, and they've received it over the last like week or so, and they're ranked obviously now. But a lot of these national media members are like, oh, it's, you know, it's such a bummer, because really the only game that South Carolina truly like did not play well in, like it wasn't close ever, was the Ole Miss game.
Yes.
And that right off the bat, like you knew basically from the moment that game started going in the wrong direction that it probably wasn't going to be salvageable for South Carolina. But you look at the Alabama game, you look at the LSU game, of course, it's a woulda, coulda, shoulda. It's a what if situation. You know, what if you win one of those games? Are you having a different conversation right now? But I think regardless, you know, you're in a bowl game. Try to pick up a few more wins if you're South Carolina here to finish the season. And you obviously have a big game circled on your calendar with Clemson coming up in just a couple of weeks, which would be a huge win for South Carolina. But before they do that, they have to take down Missouri this weekend. And it's a team, like we've said so many times, that they have struggled with. You don't want to overlook this game. You want to go into it, and you really need to win if you're South Carolina, because you need to rid yourself of all of this negativity that I feel like has surrounded this matchup for so long. I'm tired of the negativity. I remember 2 years ago, South Carolina was rolling. It was a good season. It was the season that they beat Tennessee and Clemson back to back. And you look back on that season, and like such a sore spot in the season was when South Carolina lost at home to Missouri. Like that was just such a bummer. Like you can't have that happen.
And the thing was that with that game was that South Carolina, I think that was the last time it was a ranked on ranked matchup for South Carolina when they, well, actually, wait, what am I saying? Hold on. Shane said something this week. I wrote a story about it this morning where South Carolina had an opportunity like this where, look, they were ranked, they had just gotten ranked, and then they went out there and didn't play well. That was the Missouri game 2 years ago. That's what I meant to say the whole time. But look, this is a great opportunity for South Carolina. You have Missouri by a string right now where one thing goes wrong for Missouri this weekend, it's over for them. Like playoff out of the window for sure, whatever slim odds they have. But it's kind of the same way for South Carolina because mathematically and hypothetically, they still have a chance to potentially get into the playoff. I don't want to start going down that rabbit hole really much, but the opportunity is out there if you win some games and you get some help around the conference and the country. So, look, South Carolina, they really have a tall task at hand. I know it's been such a long time since they've been able to beat this team, but here are the things that they do have this year that are different than the other years. Number one, a great rushing attack. Rocket Sanders, Oscar Attaway, Lenora Sellers. You have the offensive line is playing as good as it has in such a long time. That's the other thing. I think you can win the battle at the line of scrimmage. You have the offensive line to go out there now and do the thing. And then you also have the phenomenal defense to go out there and make life really tough on whoever's at quarterback and whoever's in the backfield running the football. So between those two things, there's also other factors that are going to matter in this game, like how is South Carolina going to stop Luther Burden and Theo Weiss and all those guys. But in terms of biggest matchups, like those are the three things where I feel like South Carolina is feeling a lot better about its chances if things continue to trend the way they happen.
Okay, Jack, a little bit more to get to here on GC Live. But before we get to it, another sponsor that we want to say a big thank you to.
Yes? That is right. Prize Picks is our other sponsor we're going to talk about real quick. So if you don't know much about Prize Picks, they're the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in all of North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players and pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And then, of course, you watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. It's what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. I've used Prize Picks plenty in the past. You can use it right now for college football. Heck, you can use it for this matchup between South Carolina and Missouri. So you pick more than or less than on maybe you want to pick Luther Burden having less yards than whatever he's projected at right now. You can do that. You want Rocket Sanders more on his rushing yards, do it. You can do college football, NHL. There's no baseball right now, NBA, college basketball is in the thick of things. A lot of opportunities, a lot of options to pick from. And again, that's why it makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So if you're interested, just go to prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app. Use the code on screen, GC, that stands for Gamecock Central, to receive a guaranteed $50 once you play $5 in lineups. So we want to thank Prize Picks for being a wonderful sponsor of all of our GC Live programs.
Checking in every week with Jack. No longer the Yankees.
Yeah, baseball season's over. What are we talking about now?
It's over, but it'll be back before we know it. At least for me, it will be back. I'm already starting spring training plans. Anyways, Oilers taking down the Islanders last night. Tough loss for Jack and his Islanders yesterday.
You know what?
An NHL season in my mind.
You know what? #1 pick. Let's just get it. The season's a bust. Let's just move on. Get the #1 pick.
Well, you all are on a difficult trip right now out to Western Canada. You have the Canucks tomorrow night.
Those are always the toughest trips.
Very, very tough. But I will say Florida Panthers are rolling, and so are the Carolina Hurricanes. Anyways, enough NHL talk. We are talking about football here today. We had a comment just a few minutes ago, actually, which I think is a good point to bring up. And it's about South Carolina handling the national attention and the ranking. Because as you mentioned, we have seen it in the past. South Carolina becomes ranked, gets a lot of national attention, loses. That cannot happen. This team has dealt with adversity this season. There have been some ups. There have been some downs. They are where they are right now, and now they're starting to receive a lot of praise, a lot of notice, obviously from a media standpoint, and then, of course, from the ranking standpoint as well. Jack, do you think that this group will handle it differently than what we've seen in years past?
Well, they've handled the hype and all that stuff well so far. Look, all right, so here's the thing. I say that because the hype has been around them. I feel like, honestly, since the LSU game, a lot more eyeballs have been on this team since then. It's just they're now getting nationally ranked, and they're in the college football playoff hunt and all that stuff. So from that aspect, yeah, they're getting a lot more attention. But it's been like this with people talking about them for weeks now. And they've handled it really well. How do you think they won that Vanderbilt game? Like, they were able to handle the hype that, can they do it again? Can they go out here and pick up another big win? Vanderbilt's so good this year. Can South Carolina do it? They've already dealt with all this sort of stuff before. So, like, it's just a number at the end of the day. And it's not the final ranking. Like, there's still a few more CFP rankings to go. So I think South Carolina is handling it just fine. They're not buying into the rat poison and the outside noise and all that. Like, Shane was literally saying, like, hey, for any students on campus, don't pat these guys on the back. Don't tell them how great they are. Like, honestly, I'm sure he would prefer if the students were booing them and telling the players how much they stunk and all that stuff. But obviously, they're not going to do that. And look, Shane has done a great job of keeping everything in perspective, like never letting it get too far down the line, one game at a time, all this coach speak stuff. But it's true, and the players have responded really well as a result.
I think it's funny that you bring up rat poison. I just think that's a funny
it's the go-to line here.
In general, the go-to line for Lane Kiffin, of course, who basically trademarked that. I think for me, like, it's kind of come in waves, right? So like you say, after the LSU game, South Carolina received a lot of hype, and they did. And then I think when they lost to Ole Miss, it like kind of came down a little bit, and then, came back up, and then it goes back down. And it's kind of been like a non-linear level of hype that South Carolina has received so far this season. But you're right. I think it's been pretty consistent over the past couple of weeks. I think people might be slightly concerned just about now finally being ranked and having that number. And to us, it's just a number. And hopefully to the team, it's just a number. But, there is a little bit probably of a bad taste in some people's mouths just because of what they've seen in the past. But I do think this is a different team. And I think that, like you said, this group has responded to adversity before. I don't know why it does that.
I don't know either.
I did not do a thumbs up or anything. It just like bubbles and does a thumbs up. Like if I try to do this, it won't go. Anyway,
that's so strange. But anyway.
Back to my point. I think that the group has dealt with adversity and overcame that this year. But, hopefully you just keep on keeping on, look ahead, move on to this game, and don't really let that interfere with what's going on. Because obviously once the national media starts to get involved, like we watch this team every single week. You are there every single week covering them. The fan base is watching it every single week. But now that South Carolina is starting to receive some of that national attention, you're getting people that, haven't necessarily watched South Carolina all season. They've kind of watched from afar, but now they're locked in and you got a lot more eyes on you. So a little bit more pressure certainly comes with that. And as you looked around out the season here, you want to stack up those wins so you can get into the best bowl game possible. It's time for my favorite segment on our show, Jack, the segment where we talk about what bowl game you think South Carolina is going to go to. We do this almost every week because obviously it fluctuates a little bit, but I want to hear, and not where you want to go, where you think they will go.
I think they're going to a game out in Florida. I think that just makes the most sense from the standpoint of, I think it's probably just like they're probably going to get somewhere around 8 to 9 wins to close out the regular season. Let's be real. I think they're at least winning one of these next two against Missouri and Clemson, and they'll beat Wofford. So either way, you have a good chance of getting to 8. But I think honestly, like, the Citrus Bowl is not too far out of the realm of possibility to get 9 wins, and then I keep wanting to call it the Outback Bowl, but the ReliaQuest Bowl.
Yes,
the ReliaQuest Bowl. It took me a second to process it. It's out in Tampa. I think with 8 wins, you probably get there. So if I had to make a guess, an educated guess, where I think this team's going to end up going, I would say Tampa. I think the ReliaQuest Bowl. Look, it's been a little while since they've been there. Last time was Muschamp's first year, and before that, it was the Clowney game. And I know they've been a lot since the turn of the century, but it's been a little bit, and it just makes more sense for them compared to like the bowl out in Houston and then the Vegas Bowl. Those are bowls where I think more geographically speaking, you're going to take a team with a similar record that's a lot closer to those areas.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree, actually. I was going to say the Citrus Bowl and the ReliaQuest. I always say it
ReliaQuest.
ReliaQuest Bowl.
AKA Outback Bowl.
The old Outback Bowl in Tampa, Florida now. And honestly, because South Carolina has been to the Outback Bowl several times and won, I think it would be a little bit more exciting to send them to the Citrus Bowl and just kind of have a change of pace and location.
Oh.
Obviously, they went to the Gator Bowl a few years ago, but I think, because of their history with the Outback Bowl, it would be cool to have an opportunity for South Carolina to play in the Citrus Bowl. Of course, we'll have to see how that all shakes out. And it's very much dependent. It's crazy, like the difference between what a 6-win team gets versus what an 8-win team gets. So South Carolina needs to add a couple more wins to kind of get into that conversation, but obviously very doable as we look at the schedule going forward. And Jack, if the game was in Orlando, you were just in Orlando. It's like your place.
I know. It's crazy. Oh, one other bowl game I forgot to mention. And I don't really think they'll go just because they could because they've never been. Music City Bowl out in Nashville. Like
you just said last week you didn't want to go to that.
I don't want to. Well, I don't. There's
complaining about that bowl.
There's a difference between not wanting to go and thinking the team is going to go. I don't want to go.
I did say, don't tell me where you want to go. I said, where do you think they'll go?
Yeah, exactly.
You can go back to Hall's Chop House.
Yeah, exactly. I can go back to Hall's, put on shoes to have, but
a nice steak.
But you know what? You're right about Orlando. Like, I think I was just there, but who doesn't love going to Florida? Who doesn't love going to Disney, Universal, all the good vibes? Like, the team would probably most certainly go. So I'm down with it. But like the other thing is they haven't, it's probably been a long time since, gosh, the Citrus Bowl is called the Capital One Bowl the last time they really went against Wisconsin or Nebraska, whatever, in the Connor Shaw years, whatever it was. So, yeah, that'd be pretty cool. But at the same time, it's not so much about, all right, well, the bowl, like South Carolina hasn't gone there in such a long time, so by virtue, they should go. It's also about, like Todd said here, it depends on how many SEC teams make, because I think the scenario is the highest ranked SEC team that doesn't make the playoff would go to the Citrus Bowl, I think by default, if I'm not mistaken. I know bowls are usually picked out by what bowls want this team. That's why I think South Carolina went to the Gator Bowl a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken. But in this case, I think it's more so highest ranked SEC team. It's probably going to come down to Carolina, LSU, maybe Ole Miss, maybe. I don't know. Depends. Georgia, probably. Whoever that one team is that's on the outside looking in by season's end will probably be the team that ends up going to the Citrus Bowl. And then from there, I think it's either Music City or ReliaQuest Bowl for South Carolina.
Well, then I think if, you had to pick between Nashville and Tampa, you'd pick Tampa. I think I would too. I love Nashville. It's an amazing city. But the Knights play Nashville. I was just in Nashville for a series that they had there. So Tampa would be nice. Plus the weather. It's going to be way, way colder in Nashville than it is in Tampa, Florida in January.
For sure. The weather, I've heard, CJ was telling me about the other day, the weather in Nashville is supposed to be really cold around that time of year. It's fun, but it's the cold weather outweighs everything. That just does not sound fun. So let's do Tampa. It sounds like a good time. Worst case, Orlando, Tampa, Nashville. Does that sound like the right order?
Worst case, that sounds like a great situation. Any one of those places. And yeah, the cool thing is, as you mentioned, the team gets to do so many fun things when they go to these bowl games. I remember when they were at the Duke's Mayo Bowl a few years ago, there was a racing experience that the team got to do. And of course, I got to do it as well because I was there. I like to do roller coasters, that type of gig. The NASCAR driving was honestly the scariest thing. We were not driving. Obviously, we were sitting in the passenger seat, and you had a professional driver. And I'm not kidding you. You're going straight so fast, and you are about to hit the wall, and then they cut the turn. I will never forget that. That was genuinely terrifying, but also very fun. And I tried to vlog it for Gamecock Central. Couldn't post any of it because I think I was cussing the entire time. So
well,
lucky I was scared.
Lucky for you, I'll give it a shot this year if they get out to. I don't think they're going to the Duke's Mayo Bowl. It doesn't sound fun to go back to Charlotte again. I
don't think they'll go to the Duke's Mayo Bowl. They play a lot in Charlotte, and they were just there. So I don't really have that on my radar for bowl games that I think South Carolina will go to. But obviously, only time will tell. All that we know is that South Carolina is going to a bowl game after their big win over Vanderbilt last weekend, an opportunity to rid themselves of whatever has happened over the past few years with Missouri this weekend, and that is a huge game for South Carolina. Wes Mitchell and I just recorded a recruiting rundown where we talked all about the official visitors, unofficial visitors, big names that are coming in this weekend to Columbia, because as we know, it's not just about what you see on the field, but there is a whole world of recruiting that South Carolina is also dealing with as well during game days. So a lot going on this weekend, and a big weekend for South Carolina. Only a couple more game days left in Columbia, which is sad. I can't believe it. But that just means that we will fully be in basketball season, and baseball is coming up. But I won't get too far ahead because we still have a lot more football to talk about this year. So Jack, anything that you want to add or would like to say before we say goodbye?
Well, the Islanders suck. The Yankees stink right now. Well, the season's over, but no, I'm just
the World Series.
I'm just messing. Anything but winning a World Series is a failure. So, but you know what? No, South Carolina related. I think they got a good chance to win this weekend. Like, it's not a surprise that it is a surprise that they're a 2-touchdown favorite, but the way they've been playing shows that they can go out there and do it. So it's nice to see South Carolina playing such dominant football, and I think you really hope it continues because this team already clinched a bowl bid. Now what can they do from here? Can they get those 8-9 wins? Can they even get 10 wins with a bowl win at year's end? We'll have to see. It's been a while since they've done that.
That would be awesome. And I know everyone here is certainly rooting for that. Don't forget, y'all, follow us at Gamecock Central on social media. Check out GamecockCentral.com for comprehensive, up-to-date coverage of the South Carolina Gamecocks, not just in the world of football, but across all sports for South Carolina. But we appreciate all of you joining us here today on GC Live. It's always fun on Wednesdays with you guys. And of course, we will be back next Wednesday with more. So for Jack Veltri, I'm Kendall Smith. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. And thanks so much for tuning into this edition of GC Live here on Gamecock Central.